probably the story in this exhibition that really represents the power of the photograph most in determining somebody's life course is two photographs of two young Italians, Vincent and Gilda Fabrizio. Gilda lived in a village in Abruzzi and she was 17 at the time. Vincent was in Tasmania working on the hydro. They didn't know each other. They came from quite distant villages but in the same region. And her parents went to church one Sunday and the priest from Vincent's village was in the church and he said they were looking for girls to marry, Italian boys who were working in Tasmania. And she was encouraged to write a letter to the name she was given was Vincent. And the village, they didn't have a lot of money, and the village got together and bought her a coat that was made by a dressmaker and paid to have a photograph taken of her. And she sent that photograph to this boy, as she called him, she didn't know. And Vincent, who was at the hydro, came down into Hobart, borrowed a suit and had a photo taken at Beatty's, because he was also told by the Italian priest here that there might be a possibility of a girl back. And so they shared the photographs, and on the basis of those two photographs, this 17-year-old Gilda and Vincent, as a young man, decided to marry. For Italians and for many indeed migrants, particularly Catholics, it would be just forbidden for a young unmarried woman to come to Australia without being married. So a proxy marriage had to take place. So in her village in Italy, Gilda was married with her godfather stepping in as the groom, and in Tasmania Vincent came down to Sandy Bay and his landlady stood in as the proxy bride. So they were legally married, and she then embarked on the 7-week journey to Melbourne. Vince made his way to Melbourne to meet her. There were 17 brides on the ship, and Vincent and all the other men had a sign with their name on it. And so she saw him and knew that that was her husband, seeing him for the very first time on the basis of that photograph. And they've been married for 60 years. So that power of that decision by that one photograph that she said on the voyage out, she just kept looking at and wondering, and I'm sure Vincent was doing the same here. So one of the other stories that I was really struck by when I interviewed a Polish woman, Helena Donalska, and she told me about her life. She escaped from communist Poland in 1972 and the photographs that she had. Interestingly, she was a professional photographer in Poland, and she escaped because she said, I just couldn't stand having to photograph any more officials, and the way that her artistic ability was stifled. But when I got to Helena to talk to her, she was in her early 80s, and a couple of weeks before I met her, she'd made some decisions about her photos, and she realised she didn't have a family. She didn't think that any of her friends would be interested in her photographs. So she went to her albums, and the photos that meant the most to her, the ones that were most precious that she wanted to keep, she removed from the albums, and she put them in a Woolworths plastic bag with some bubble wrap, and she wrapped the bubble wrap around and then had another plastic bag, and then she placed them in the bottom of her rubbish bin, which she then put out on the street. And she thought that one day, she loved Time 10, she thought one day somebody will be doing an archaeological dig at the tip and might find her photos. So that was really poignant, and I didn't say anything about, the possibilities or not. But what I did do is say, have you got the albums? And she did have the albums. So we sat down with these albums where the pages were, and you could see where the back of some of those photos had been taken. And what was remarkable, that there were still images that didn't mean much to her in there, but the ones that were missing, she could explain to me exactly what the story was in the missing photograph. And we spent quite a few hours talking about each of those missing images. And that was really poignant for me, that somebody could go to a page and say, no, that photograph, no, this is the photograph that shows that. And that the ones that were still there, she was quite dismissive of. So that power of that photograph, when it was no longer there as a material object, to continue to tell a story, really told me a lesson about the power of images and the place they have in our memory and memory making.